Okay, creativity and libraries. I've subtitled this because I just couldn't resist. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Some of you recognise the movie that's from, and if you do, no more need to say anything. And if you don't, well, I'm not going to explain, but do go and find out. It's a great movie. We're using the word creativity in libraries a lot to justify what we do. I think it's going to be really important in the future that we do actually stimulate the creativity of our communities, but I don't think we're using the word with a lot of knowledge around what it might mean and how we might communicate to our communities just what we mean when we say we're going to stimulate creativity. So that's where I want to go today. This is me. I'm an academic. I work at Curtin University as a lecturer in information studies. I specialise in the technology and public libraries units. And as such, my approach tends to be like this. I want to get the subject and I want to pin it down. I want to get some definitions and I want to find out facts and figures about it, which is all very interesting. However, I also wanted to make sure that in this keynote there was a chance for you to see the butterfly flying free, as it were, or even in book form, flying free in a library. So what I wanted to do is have a practitioner in to talk about creativity in libraries from a very practical point of view and show how it's done. And what better person than Mel Booth? He's the university librarian at the University of Technology, Sydney. He'll I'm sure say more about himself if he wants to later on. But after I've done my definitions and let's see how it's being used and what does it all mean stuff, Mel's going to come in and say, nah, this is what we're doing. Of course it's important. Let's go. So he might even use some words and terms quite differently to how I do, and we can have a debate at the end if we have time. So that kind of works well. Okay, so creativity and libraries. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So when people use the word creativity in libraries, often there are different words that they're trying to grasp for. Sometimes they're using it to mean innovation, sometimes entrepreneurship, artistic talent, flexibility, originality, critical thinking, all these ideas around. Sometimes you see a sentence when people use creativity in a library and they actually mean one of these rather than creativity. So I don't actually think these are exact synonyms for creativity, and I want to go on much further to have a look at how we can define creativity. However, they're pretty interesting substitutes that people use a lot of the time. Now, what I'd like you to do is to go and get a pen and paper. Now, this exercise is going to take 2 minutes, so that's 2 minutes of your time sitting there twiddling your thumbs if you don't go and get a pen and paper. So I'd like you to have a pen and paper, and while you're grabbing that pen and paper, I'd like you to have a think about a problem in your library. Now that could be we keep tripping over the rubbish bin, or it could be if we don't do something about so-and-so next week, one of our problem staff members, there is going to be a murder from somebody else on the staff who can no longer handle their behaviour. Okay, so any gamut, we don't know, books keep falling off the shelves, we can't supply ebooks because we've got a lock-in with our publisher that the supplier that just is too expensive, we want to cancel all our electronic subscriptions, any problem in your library. Okay, so write it down. Now, once you've done that, and because this is just a run through, I'm not going to have that painful 2-minute space where you do some thinking. However, what I'd like you to do is consider this. It's an egg whisk, okay? What I'd like you to do is think about how your problem's like an egg whisk, and I'd like you to write down as many ideas as you can in 2 minutes. I don't care how stupid left field they are. I'd like you to write down as many ideas as you can about how your problem is like an egg whisk. Go. Now, because this is just my run through, I'm going to pretend you've done that. Okay, so one of the things around creativity, and we'll talk much more about it in a little while, is about seeing connections between different ideas. And I'm as guilty as anybody else because I was trying to find a research area. I've been doing a lot of work in a lot of different areas over the last years. And I actually didn't realise that what I was interested in was creativity. But what I want to do is show you some of the things I've been working on so you can actually go, hello, yes, of course, the gathering thread there is creativity. But one of the things, just like that egg whisk might be enough to sort of tip you over into finding a solution to a problem, maybe. It wasn't until I was holidaying, I was in Paris, I was in the Louvre, and I'd spent the day just absorbing all these wonderful paintings and pictures and sculptures. And I was just sort of a glut of all this creativity from other people. And I suddenly realised I just keep being drawn to the idea of creativity. Bingo, all these other things that I've been doing in the last little while in terms of research, they actually are all about creativity. But it's been very sideways, but that's been the attractor. So one of the things that I'm very interested in is unconferences. This is the State Library of Queensland unconference, the first unconference being held. And there we all are on our hands and knees deciding the program, making up the entire conference on the day then and there. This is, 5-6 years ago, when the library that I worked in, we had a Second Life Island, and I was involved with helping some of the students who were doing some accessible work using Second Life. And one of our students her job was to remodel the island, and this is my avatar that's trying out the underwater meditation pond that she created on the island, which I thought was lovely and creative. Okay. One of the projects that I had when I was working in the university library was I got together with some other techie, maybe a little frustrated people. 2 hours a fortnight we'd get together, and we had our own little skunk works going. And what we would do is we would work on problems that needed solving in the library, technological problems generally, but we were so enthusiastic and eager to increase our skills that it didn't matter whether we got stuff done or didn't get anything done. We wanted to increase our skills. So what we did is we did things like we made a LibX toolbar. We redid the RSS page so that we had a lot of information about RSS feeds. And it was just stuff that other people weren't doing. But the idea was that we'd sit and what inspired us would be what we'd work on. I wrote my master's thesis a couple of years ago, and what I did it on was open source library software. I went and interviewed people who'd coded open source library software and managers who decided to sponsor open source library software. Again, no vendor was fulfilling the requirements they wanted, so they went out and created their own creativity. I've done some work around hackers and hacking and looking at the hacker aesthetic, the hacker beliefs, and looking at how it could be applied in libraries. And part of that work has involved talking to John Blyberg, who created his own discovery layer, SOPAC, to Chris De Winter, who has created a number of WordPress adaptations for several libraries in Belgium that they're not the same library system, but they can actually use this system in order to create a front page with all sorts of information, pulling in information from their shared catalogue just about their library, and he just basically tinkered and tweaked. We've got Joanne Ransom over there who created Koha, open source library management system. She also created Kitty, which is a digital repository where the community could create their metadata and their digital repository and publish easily, with the library being the publishing platform for the communities, and that's taken off across New Zealand now. But that was one of her ideas. There was a gap. She wanted to make something, and down in the left-hand corner, let's go back. Down in the left-hand corner is Paul Hagen. He's done stuff with the National Library of Australia, like being able to find photographs in their collection by colour. So a little colour wheel, you click on it. And what he discovered was that there was some formats, like a particular type of ink on parchment, that when you pushed on a particular colour, all those items would come up. And now there was no metadata on those items, those images, to say the format. But that was a way to get into it. He's also done some great work on facial recognition and just all these creative ways to solve problems. The last little bit of work that I've been doing has been around people getting material that would be otherwise supplied by their library but is freer and easier online. So like this, which is Library Pirate, which is no longer existent. LibraryPirate.com, where students got together, they said, okay, well, we're going to scan all our stuff, you go and ask for a textbook and we'll send it to you in an electronic version. So again, creatively getting around the systems that we put in place. So To me, that's all about creativity, and that's what interests me. But I was so blind to the ideas of what creativity might have been. I hadn't realised that that was was the thread running through a lot of stuff I was looking at. So it may well be that a lot of the stuff that interests and inspires you is actually around creativity. It may not be, but it's worth considering. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some claims about creativity. I'm going to look at what libraries say about creativity, and then I'm going to have a look at a creativity toolkit definitions, so we actually know what we're talking about in libraries when we talk about creativity, thinking techniques that you can use in order to be more creative or to understand what creative thinking is, and then briefly touch on why we should care, and then I'll hand over to Mal. Okay, so big claims are made for creativity. Richard Florida from the Martin Prosperity Institute, which is actually aligned with a couple of universities in the US, he's been trying to track and index creativity across a number of countries. And he thinks creativity is very important. Nations that invest in creativity and that achieve all of the 3 T's, and I will talk a bit more about the 3 T's later, of economic development also have higher levels of human development, life satisfaction and happiness. So big claims are being made about countries that can invest in creativity having all these wonderful outcomes. This is the Global Creativity Index map that he's created, and if you can't see that and see where you are, this is a ranking table of the top countries for technology, talent and tolerance, the 3 T's, and that creates a global creativity index. You're looking at Sweden, United States, Finland, Denmark, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Norway, Singapore and Netherlands in the top 10. Okay, so trying to measure, track and make important creativity. Now, libraries are making claims also about creativity. And I'm not talking about staff creativity. I want to be quite clear that what I'm interested in a lot of the time when I'm talking about creativity is how libraries can stimulate creativity in their communities. So that's what I'm looking at. So what I've done is it was like shooting fish into a barrel, really. I just was looking for instances and mentions of creativity in the literature, the public-facing information produced by a number of libraries. And it was just there in abundance. Now, when people think about libraries and creativity, often they think, well, the library has story time that has a craft activity. Of course, we're promoting creativity. But there's a heck of a lot more that's done. But that may well be that some staff think, well, that's where the creativity goes, just in story time and just in the activities that we do with kids if we're a public library, and in academic libraries. Oh, not at all. So let's have a look. Okay, so Public Libraries of New Zealand, they last month issued a strategic framework. The framework summary has 5 elements, and one of them, the cultural one, is communities that value heritage and embrace diversity and creativity. And within the report, there's a little highlight about libraries being spaces for creativity. Okay, so we value it, and we want to make the point that in the Tasman District Library in Richmond, there's a media lab. Okay. State Library of Queensland, they've got a specialised facility. It's its own little building called The Edge. Subtitle, tagline, Exploring Creativity. And this is how they describe the purpose. At The Edge, we aim to provide young Queenslanders with the opportunity and inspiration to explore creativity across the arts, technology, science and enterprise. Okay, right into creativity. But not as well defined as it could be. Used as though we all understand what they're talking about. The New York Public Library celebrating 100 years exhibition. I was lucky enough to go to that, and it was actually divided into 4 different sections: observation, contemplation, society and creativity. The library's collections of materials on the arts encompass the rarefied and the popular, the classical as well as the avant-garde. The first edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is displayed next to a comic book version of the story, reflecting the work's cultural impact more than 125 years after Shelley first imagined her Doctor and his creation, etc., etc. Okay, so that's very much looking at the works as a source of creativity. National Library of Singapore, this is their wonderful building. It's got a little pod up there which looks out over the city. Quite amazing. They also look after the regional public libraries, and they have a number of information sheets about them. And yes, they use creativity also. the Changsan Public Library. The children's section is decorated around the concept of a garden designed to pique young children's interest and stimulate their creativity. Bukit Batok Public Library. The children's section is decorated with colourful animal cartoons to attract children's interest and inspire creativity. Okay, so we're making all these claims all the time in libraries, but my argument is we're not actually defining or saying what we mean, and we should because it's important stuff. Jurong Regional Library. The library serves as an urban development model for a creative, entrepreneurial, vibrant, culturally rich and technologically savvy community. One of its objectives is to identify and catalyse projects to promote the fusion of the arts, business and technology so as to unlock the collective creativity of the community and to achieve a new level of connectedness. Okay, big claims all centred around creativity. And finally, the library at the Esplanade Central, it's an arts and film, music, dance library. It aims to support creativity, learning and entertainment for a broad range of uses, from casual browsers to students, teachers, arts professionals, administrators and practitioners. So they very much align creativity here with learning and entertainment rather than business and technologically savviness as they did in the last one. Okay, so we're using it all the time in libraries. And by the way, I'm collecting uses of creativity in libraries. You can get hold of my email address. I'll flash it up. And if you do see instances of libraries claiming to be creative, especially to increase the creativity of their community, please flick them my way. I'm very interested in that. Okay, so yes, libraries are using it. Yes, it's seen as important, but okay, so what exactly is it? Okay, so Ward, A.W. Ward, was the first person who's recorded using creativity in the English language. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a guessing game. When do you think it was? Okay, the first use of the word creativity was talking about Shakespeare. So this is creativity not as somebody did something creative, but as some kind of abstract quality of a person or a place or a thing. Okay, so creativity as a quality. So this was only in 1875. So it's actually quite a recent concept. And what exactly is creativity? Well, one of the proponents of creativity who's very, very much worth reading is Mahei Csikszentmihalyi. Okay, so if you can say that, you can actually, I think, already graduate from creativity studies because it's just quite a mouthful. Okay, but he's one of the pinnacles. You might have heard of the concept of flow, where people get so involved in what they're doing, everything else drops away, time drops away, and it's a peak human experience. And that's what he's interested in, and he links creativity very much to that. So he talks about creativity as any act, idea, or product that changes an existing domain or that transforms an existing domain into a new one. Pardon? Okay, so that is one definition. So it needs to be new, original. Let's just unpack a bit, because a lot of the definitions of creativity, there's three elements that they talk about. The first two is in almost every definition of creativity. The last one I think does need to be there, and about 60% of them talk about this. Okay, so the first thing is that for an idea to be creative, it needs to be novel, original. So something like using an egg beater in a library, an egg whisk in a library, may well be novel. It also, however, has to be useful. Okay, it's not really terrifically creative to wander around holding an egg whisk for no purpose whatsoever in one's library. So it needs to be useful. Now, there's useful and there's useful. And in 1954, in an attempt to create a rubber substitute, people in, I think it was New Hampshire, mixed boric acid and silicon oil, trying to create a rubber substitute. Instead, they created this. Okay, I don't know whether you recognise that, but that's silly putty, okay? So that's something that can flow if you leave it there long enough. You can hit it with a hammer and it will shatter. You roll it in a ball, it bounces, it does all sorts of stuff. It's a wonderful toy. But when they were trying to create it in the lab, they weren't actually intending to create a toy that kids would do this with. So the other quality that they're looking at with creativity is that it needs to be fit for purpose, okay? So yeah, it might be novel and useful, but you can't really claim any creativity unless your idea is fit for purpose. So when we're claiming to increase community creativity in libraries, are we actually claiming that people will then be able to have more ideas that are novel, useful and fit for purpose? It may well be, and if it is, then we may need to be designing our measurements and our programs to aim towards that. Okay. Another way of looking at creativity is how to identify it, and there's a number of what they call domains of creativity. And Mooney, 1963, identified place, product, process, and person. Let's look at those in slow motion. Okay, so the idea of place is as a venue making people more creative. So your typical thing would be your art gallery, or maybe indeed your library. Okay, so one of the things that libraries might want to think about is when we're talking about stimulating creativity of our community, are we talking about providing a place where that can happen? And I think very much this is what they were getting at in the New Zealand report, where they were talking about spaces for creativity. And also when they're talking about the edge, they've created a specialised building that's aimed at exploring creativity. So it's very much focusing on place. The children's section in the Cheng San Public Library and the Bukit Batok Public Library in Singapore. Again, they've put pretty things around in the kids area, so it must be about creativity. Okay, but that's talking about place. Product? Product is talking about the output, so it might be a beautiful painting, it might be considered to be creative, or indeed, traditionally in libraries, a lot of the time it's been books, okay? But it may as well be something like this. I just love this picture. I've just thrown this in. I've stretched things so I could throw this picture in because I love it so much. But this is in the edible book competitions that libraries often have. So this is The Devil Wears Prada cake that a library community member has made, okay? So the library has stimulated that person to create and be creative, to create a creative product, okay? So product is another way of domain of looking at evaluating creativity. The New York Public Library, when they talk about creativity, that's very much what their focus was in that exhibition, is we have artistic stuff. Okay, process. So when people think about process, this is, again, as I said, an ideal example is the kids' story time, the crafts that people do at story time. But I think, again, in New Zealand, when they talk about communities that value our heritage, embrace diversity and creativity, I think they're talking about creativity as a process. Again, the edge. When they talk about inspiration to explore creativity, I think not only is the edge aiming to provide a place for creativity, but they're also aiming to give them an opportunity to have a creative process. And it's really important because if you're talking about a place, you might be counting the number of people who come through. If you're talking about a process, I think you're actually trying to evaluate quite different things. Okay, Jurong Regional Library that talks about catalysing projects, the library at the Esplanade talking about supporting creativity from a wide range of practitioners. I think the creativity that they're aiming to support, it may be about product, about providing books, but I actually think that a lot of it's about programs. So it's more about process. And the final way of looking at creativity, and a lot of the work around measuring creativity has actually gone into this stuff around people being creative. So something like this is a music group. The person on the very end here with the blonde wig, that's Amy Tan, the novelist. In fact, they're all writers. This is a performance at the American Library Association's conference just recently. These are all very, very creative people. They write for a living, and they also, not as well as they write, have this singing group, okay? But the idea is that maybe there are some people who just innately, inherently, like there's some people who are more intelligent, some people who are more creative. And so maybe when you're looking at creativity, what you want to do is have a venue for people of that type to gather more. So more creative things. So providing a venue for a knitting circle, for example, or providing a writing session. Okay, so you might be looking at place, process, product, or people. But again, you're still using the same word creativity often and not differentiating in libraries. Okay. Another way of looking at creativity is the big C or the small c. And then if we look at Fasco 2006 is one of the people who talks about this. Big C is also known as historical creativity. So that's something like painting the Mona Lisa, okay, rather than a kid scribbling and creating a picture of mummy. Okay, so something like Falling Water, Frank Lloyd Wright's design, where it's incorporated the amazing waterfall. That's a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture is seen as amazingly creative, seminal works, and him as a creative person. I'd argue that maybe the Technical University of Delft library, where they've got this wonderful burned into the earth building, and the students sit on the roof and have picnics in the summer. This building is quite amazing if you ever get a chance to visit it. Maybe that's an example of a historically creative library. You've also got small c, or everyday creativity. And maybe as libraries, that's more what we're focusing on encouraging. I don't know, but I think we actually do need to differentiate when we talk about creativity. So an example of this is, I used to work in a library. We had an Envisionware self-check machine. When somebody made a mistake, it went The person using it didn't notice it, the staff member didn't notice it, and so they'd keep going and then they wouldn't be able to issue their books. So we were sitting around at a staff meeting one day and we thought about this, okay, Family Feud. They used to have that wonderful noise when people got something wrong. I don't know whether it's in all countries, certainly we had it in Australia and I believe it's in the US, and it used to go ba-bow. Okay, and so luckily somebody has actually very generously uploaded to the Internet Archive the ba-bow sound. So we were able to download it, install it on that self-check machine. So now instead of going, it goes ba-bow, and people are very clear that they've made a mistake. And it's kind of a nice, polite way of saying it. So that's an idea of small c creativity. Nobody's going to win the Nobel Prize for creativity as a result of that, but it does solve a problem in a unique, novel and useful and fit-for-purpose way. So maybe when we're looking at creativity, we need to focus more on small c creativity. Okay, and counting. When Richard Florida does that wonderful map and ranking of countries, he looks at technology, talent and tolerance. His idea is that if people live in a society where they can be gay, they can marry, they can not be discriminated against for being disabled, for having a mental illness, where there's more tolerance, it means that creativity can thrive. So that's one of the things that he measures when he looks at creativity. So maybe that's information that we need to know when we're talking about creativity and how we're going to encourage it. Are we increasing the technological knowledge of our community? Are we attracting talent? Are we doing stuff to increase the tolerance of our community? Displays, groups, being supportive. And now I'm going to move on to creative thinking tools, okay? So these are just some ideas about if you're stimulating creativity in your community, maybe these are some of the things and thinkings you wanted to have happen. So Sternberg talks about, to be creative, one must first decide to generate new ideas, analyse these ideas, and sell these ideas to others. So when one is generating ideas, one of the things that a lot of the tests of creativity do is measure divergent thinking. So back to our egg whisk. With the egg whisk, what I asked you to do was find as many ideas as possible. When you use divergent thinking, what you're doing is they're measuring how fluid, how quick, how original, how able people are to think of a number of different ideas and answers and solutions to problems. So that's divergent thinking. However, divergent thinking isn't enough. The other measure that people make when they're measuring creativity is the converse of that, convergent thinking. Okay, so with your egg beater, there might be one idea there that's absolute gold. And if you can actually work out which one of them is the gold, then you can actually be better at applying that solution. One of the things that people who are good at convergent thinking can do is they can actually see problems. They can see, oh, there's a room for improvement here. So they can look at all the possibilities and just hone it in a way that other people don't. So one of the things you might be looking for in your community is to try and increase that ability to hone down ideas as much as exposure to ideas to allow divergent thinking. The other thing that people measure often when they're looking at creativity is making new associations. Okay, so if you've got this and this, are you able to put them together? So that's why I was talking about the egg whisk and your problem. But sometimes what you can do, it's a creative thinking technique, is you can take one thing like we have a problem with getting people in and out of our libraries. They're very, very busy. How do we do that? You might want to look at the flow of traffic in airports, or there's been a lot of let's look at what they do in shopping centres and see whether we can apply that in libraries. That's happened, in the last 10, 15 years, that whole storefront, shopfront analysis of customers and units moved. Okay, so actually looking at different domains and being able to apply that to your problem is another way of being creative. And now I'm just going to go on a divergent path because I just loved this so much. Okay, so what you might need to do is create a new concept. So you might take the word sleeve, you might take the word face, and you might create something called sleeve face. Now, I don't know whether the sleeve face was the word created before or after this concept, but I just love it so much. I just want to show you some pictures. This is sleeve face. Okay, so what they've done is they've taken popular album covers and put them in real life situations. So I've just got another 3, and I'm just showing these to you because this is the type of jarring two things put together that create a new thing that's really quite different. There's this one, the Bowie one, Diamond Dogs. Another Bowie one, Rare. I really quite like that. And finally, this one's just cute. Okay, the kissing couple. Okay, so that is an example of sleeve face where people have taken totally 2 different concepts, put them together and made a new something. And yes, if you look on Flickr or something like that for sleeve face, you'll see people having a wonderfully creative time just from that juxtaposition of those 2 ideas. But then what they do with it is really quite remarkable. Okay, and Sternberg's other idea was about selling new ideas. There's no point being able to think up this new stuff, find this new stuff, without it being able to communicate it and pass it on well. And he's got an idea that maybe the people who are more creative aren't actually having the better ideas, aren't actually making them converge or getting stuff from a couple of domains, but maybe what they're doing is actually they're good at selling those new ideas to other people at the right time. So maybe getting our communities to be able to communicate better their ideas is a way of increasing the creativity of our communities. Okay, so the last little thing I want to do, and it's just questions. Do we think stimulating community creativity is an important part of what libraries do? Okay, I do. I don't have time to go on about why I think so. I think that moving into the future, it definitely is going to be something that we will value. It's something we're already valuing but not defining very well. So if one answers yes to that question, what I'd like to do is have us think again about that place, product, process, person idea, okay? Because I think that in libraries, what we focused on has been, we've been talking a bit about the venue. A lot of it has been about, we have books, you can borrow them, okay? I know that's not what libraries are anymore. I'm just saying that that is actually the preconceived idea, and that's what we have been focusing on. And then there's been a little bit on process and a little bit on person, but not as much. And what I'm suggesting is maybe now it's time, for all sorts of reasons, and we can have this debate another time, product is moving way out of the spotlight. People can get stuff, especially electronic stuff, free and easy. Not all of it, I know that, but there's less of a spotlight on us as providers of intellectual content. However, place, process and people may well be better to come to the fore, and that might be a framework with which we can think about stimulating creativity of our communities. So if it is important, then I think there's some questions that we need to go on to think about. I think we need to know better how to talk about creativity, what it really means. We need to know how to add it to our aims, so to our strategic plans and into when we're assessing programs and whether they work. And I think we need to know how to measure it, and that's sort of where I'm going with my research in the future, is actually looking at, okay, can we have different definitions of creativity? And when you mean, oh, I'm trying to increase the process of all the community, the creative process, then the right measure is this. And that's sort of where I'm going. So now I'm going to hand over to Mel, who is going to stop talking about all these definitions and what does it all mean, and is going to talk about what, where, how, and this being applied practically. And there's my media credits.